Okay, so as we've come to the transition point, we believe between the antitypical fifth and sixth trumpets, according to the biblical day-year-day principle of prophetic interpretation that we have been studying these past several years, we have been looking for this week as the transition point. We had the start of the fifth trumpet in September 20th, 2024, last year, and 150 days, or 5 months biblically, brings us to February 17th this week. That was Monday this week, yesterday. But when we go back to the historical fulfillment of the trumpets in historical type, according to the historicist method of biblical interpretation, which we believe in and support as Seventh-day Adventists, as Bible-believing Christians, that there was this 150-year period between the fifth trumpet and the sixth trumpet. And then when the sixth trumpet began to blow in the year 1449, it was actually 4 years after that that the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, Constantinople, fell by fire and smoke and brimstone. So, according to the day-year-day principle of interpretation, we would expect that it would be within 4 days of this transition point, which began on Monday the 17th this week, and that would bring us until the 20th, through the 20th, that's Thursday this week, when we should be looking for fire and smoke and brimstone to come down from heaven. We've had many studies about what that might actually look like, whether it would be literal or spiritual or both. And again, we have tried not to be dogmatic and to box God in on how he can fulfill his word. But we do know that it has to follow the principle of self-similarity from type and antitype, that it has to follow the pattern of the original. And that when you see the repetition in antitype, that it will be clear that it is according to the type. But we've seen that in that principle of self-similarity, there can be details within that that are slightly different and yet does not break the typology. Now, as we've considered the fifth and sixth trumpets, we've especially been focusing on the fifth trumpet these past 5 months because that's what's been coming to pass. But now we're looking at this transition to the sixth trumpet. And of course, in the fifth trumpet, we had the locusts come out of the bottomless pit. They were as the scorpions in their power. They could only hurt the grass of the earth, but not kill. And they could not hurt those that had the seal of God in their foreheads. But they could torment. And it was the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man, which actually causes confusion. When you're struck by a scorpion, you actually have mental confusion. It's a neurotoxin. And so we could spiritually connect that with spiritual confusion. And of course, we saw that a scorpion, of course, strikes with his tail, and the tail in Scripture is connected with false prophecy. We have that in verse 10. Their stings were in their tails, and false prophecy tends to lead to spiritual confusion. And then we've been especially focusing on recently on the shape of the locusts, how they were like horses prepared to battle. And we saw the connection historically to the Mahometans or Islam and its conflict with false Christianity in Europe. And on their heads were as it crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men, and their hair as the hair of women, and the teeth of lions. That's what we've been especially looking at in our past recent studies. And of course, they had breastplates also of iron, and the sound of the wings was the sound of many chariots running to battle. And we have beautiful symbolism. We're not going to try to repeat all that this evening that we've already gone through. But of course, looking ahead and what might be happening this week, and also which we'll look at as we continue, and we've looked at some of that already, is the locusts that are like unto horses ultimately become a army of horsemen of 200,000 when the four angels are loosed that are prepared for an hour a day and a month and a year. Of course, the four angels are held in Revelation chapter 7 till the servants of God can be sealed in their foreheads. But then the four angels are loosed at the time of the sixth trumpet, and that leads to fire and smoke and brimstone coming down, and that it kills a third part of men. And we've looked a little bit at that as well, that the third part doesn't necessarily mean a literal third part of humanity, but instead could be a third part of a kingdom or a political power. And that historically, that third part was the eastern wing of the Roman Empire. And of course, we've made connections in the end time that the east coast of the United States is the comparable eastern wing of the Roman Empire today, when you have the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet being 1/3 of the dragon's kingdom. He has to have all three parts of his kingdom together operating fully in order for it to be functional. He needs the dragon power in the place of God. That's spiritualism. He has the beast in the kingly position. That's the papal power. And then the false prophet, America, is in the religious or prophetic position. All of which, of course, is a counterfeit of God's kingdom. Of course, we have a Godhead, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We have God the Father is the true Spirit. God the Son is the true King. And we have the Holy Spirit working in God's church on earth among his prophets. So we have these two kingdoms, and all three have to be operating together. So as Christ is coming down from heaven, his kingdom is coming together. And as Satan sees God's kingdom coming together, that Christ is being restored back to the throne. So now he's in the kingly position, and God's people are being sealed, and they're in the prophetic position again. And so Satan is going to try to set up his kingdom. He needs all three pieces in place in order to come into conflict with God's kingdom. And he has the dragon power, the spiritualism is in full force in this world. And the papal power has been brought back and restored from its deadly wound, as it were. But the image of the beast, the third part of the kingdom, is still yet to be fully in place. And that's what we've been looking at, this fifth and sixth trumpets are about. It's actually about the transition of America from its pagan Rome phase till its papal Rome phase, to the image of the beast. And that it's the fire that comes down from heaven in Revelation 13 that we've seen that actually causes the people to call for an image to the beast to be set up. That's in Revelation 13, 13, and 14. He doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying that they should, to them that dwell on the earth, that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword and did live. Or actually, it says, which has a wound by a sword and yet lives. Showing that the image of the beast is actually also going to receive a wound, seeming wound by the sword, and yet live. And that resurrection, as it were, that phoenix coming out of the fire, will be the rising of the image of the beast, and will be this trigger that leads to the image of the beast being set up. And at least one of the things, as we try to tie that to the historical fulfillment of the fifth and sixth trumpet in type, which was connected with the Mahometans in their conflict with false Christianity in history, that it could be again that the Mahometans could play a role, or at least be blamed or attributed to be the ones responsible for this fire come down from heaven that requires a Christian government to be set up as a bulwark against this inroad of the Mahometans or Islam. Now, that doesn't have to be the way it absolutely has to happen. It could fulfill in another way, but that seems like a distinct possibility based on the historical type. Now, here's just the time and date.com, just to show us that from September 20th, 2024, if you add 150 days, which is 5 months prophetically, that brings us to Monday, February 17th, 2025. That was yesterday. And then we have 4 days that would be comparable to the 4 years that led to the fall of Constantinople by fire and smoke and brimstone. So that would technically be on Thursday. Though, of course, there was an ongoing siege that ultimately led to that fall during those 4 years. Now, since we've come to this time of transition, when we got halfway through, or 75 days through this 150-day period, we did a mid-trumpet review for the fifth trumpet, where we looked at all of the developments that were connected with the start of the fifth trumpet blowing, especially what happened at the Summit of the Future at the United Nations, and also the explosion of the war in the Middle East, were the key events that happened that week of September 20th, 2024. And then we looked at all the things that happened up through the election and just in the weeks after the election, December 8th being the halfway point in this time period. And tonight, I would like to look at some of the headlines of just the headlines of what has been happening since early December until today. I've had some talks, and I've told some people about my understanding of these things prophetically, and at least some people have suggested back to me, well, nothing's happened. Well, let's look. Has nothing really been happening in this time period, or is a lot happening? Let's see what the news tells us, because we're told that we are supposed to compare prophecy with current events to understand the times that we live in through a biblical lens. So picking up from where we left off in our last review a couple months ago, here we have an article from the Express in the US. It says, nuclear bomb warning as Iran enriches another 400 pounds of high-grade uranium to the threshold of weapons-grade uranium. So we're going to see now all of these articles in general that we're going to be looking at. I'm not sharing them to endorse them as being accurate descriptions of everything that's happening in the world. I'm more trying to focus on how the media is being used to manipulate people's perception of reality.
Hello?
Yes? Hello, David?
Hello?
Craig, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me. Hold on.
You're cut. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, I
Okay.
can hear you.
All right. Well, I don't know where I left off, but I was saying that whether these things that we're reading in these articles of headlines are actually so is not as important as the fact that they're being used to psychologically manipulate the population to perceive things this way. So we're going to see there's many articles that are pushing the idea of a coming conflict in the Middle East, escalating to include Iran and to include nuclear weapons. And this is one of the many examples of how that's becoming very prevalent. This is actually right before the halfway point from November 20th, 2024. We also have here an article, World War from the Daily Express in the US. So these are both actually really UK publications that have their US distribution. It says the World War III crisis as Iranian lawmakers push to revoke a holy law banning nuclear bombs. So there's actually, at least officially in Iran, there is a fatwa or Islamic holy law that bans the production or development of nuclear bombs. Now, there could be secret fatwas that give permission to doing it, but at least the public position of Iran has always been that they have no desire to pursue nuclear weapons and that they claim that they can't do it because their holy law prevents it. And yet here now, there is becoming a public discussion about that holy law being changed or revoked. Then we have here from the Washington Free Beacon, this article is taken from November 22nd, actually. Iran, facing scrutiny from international watchdog, publicly ramps up its nuclear program. Tehran announces installation of new advanced centrifuges used to quickly enrich uranium for a nuclear bomb. Also from November 20th, Russia's updated nuclear red line adds uncertainty. So Russia has been altering its nuclear defense posture, and the publicly declared times or conditions under which they would consider or possibly use nuclear weapons, or consider it justified to use nuclear weapons. And the so-called red lines that they have established have subsequently all been crossed by the Western powers, particularly in the conflict in Ukraine. And thus, at least from the mindset of Russia as it's being presented to the world, Russia now considers itself fully justified in engaging in a nuclear attack against the Western powers at any time, that they no longer have to provide any more warnings or do anything else, that they've already provided the warnings, they've set the red lines, and we've crossed them all. And that's something that's very different from what has traditionally been the sort of stalemate position for the past several decades of so-called mutually assured destruction policy on both sides. And these policies are being shifting and changing to where it's now becoming openly considered to be using nuclear weapons. We also have several articles over the past several months of so-called terrorist attacks that were attributed to Muslims. That was one of the things that we said that we would be looking for during our 5-month period here from September 20th, 2024 through February 17th, 2025. We said Mahometans torment the Eastern Roman Empire for 5 prophetic months. That happened in history. And then we were looking for terrorist attacks attributed to radicalized Muslims upon the eastern seaboard of the U.S. And there's also the increase in spiritual confusion about the fulfillment of end-time prophecy. And I believe both things have actually come to pass. There has been an increase of terrorist attacks that were attributed to Muslims. I'm not saying that they were done by Muslims. They were attributed in the media to Muslims. That's what's important. And also, we'll see several articles that help us to see that there actually has greatly increased spiritual confusion about how end-time prophecy shall fulfill. So here's an article, also, again, November 20th, 2024. Florida man planned to bomb the New York Stock Exchange. The FBI has arrested Harun Abdul Malik Yanir, alleging that he wanted to set off a series of bombs on the New York Stock Exchange in the U.S., saying, "I feel like bin Laden." That's what allegedly this man said. And of course, he clearly is a Muslim based on his name. And if you go into the article, it certainly is the case. At least that's what they say about him. Now, that's, of course, an attack on the financial system here in America. Here's an article from The Guardian in the UK, also from late November. And it says Trump's Pentagon pick, Hegseth, wrote of the U.S. military taking sides in a civil war. Of course, Secretary Hegseth has since been confirmed and is the Defense Secretary of the United States today. And he said in 2020 that should Democrats win the election, the military will be forced to make a choice. So there are people who are taking positions of power in this transition of the Trump administration, where the King of the North is taking over for the King of the South, as it were, at least politically, and in the idea of a philosophically. Here in America, the eastern wing of the Roman Empire in the end times, and prominent Catholics are coming into key positions in the new administration, or those who are sympathetic with Catholics and evangelicals. Here, Hegseth had the Maltese cross emblazoned in a tattoo on his chest. Was a big scandal that we looked at, I think, in our last talk. And he also has been talking about this time of civil war coming to America and the military having to get involved directly in conflict in America. Something that we prophetically have been looking for as Seventh-day Adventists. Here also, Trump's pick for Attorney General, who's also subsequently been confirmed, Pam Bondi, slams ignorant Hamas sympathizers. Frankly, they need to be taken out of our country. And, there's many people that, there's no reason to have sympathy with Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization. They use terrorist methods that kill innocent people for political purposes. You can say, yes, they're oppressed. Yes, the conditions are terrible. Yes, something should be done about it. But you can't support how Hamas has gone about that. And they actually really largely held the people in that area hostage to their violent ways. And yet, we need to have spiritual eyesight to understand that the way that radicalized Muslims are viewed, the negative stereotype, the hatred, the vitriol, the willingness to employ extra constitutional methods to deal with them, those same mindset, that all of this is being done against those who are considered to be a radicalized fundamental religious believers. For now, the focus is on radicalized Muslims. But we know and understand prophetically that there's a time coming very soon when it's actually going to be so-called radicalized fundamentalist Bible-believing Christians that are going to be the ones that are going to receive the same treatment and the same media treatment and the same psychological conditioning and the same extrajudicial and extra constitutional methods, where there's going to be a time when they're going to want to round us up and take us out of the country. That's what these things are pointing to. Here, interestingly, from a publication called MiddleEastEye.net, Turkey severs all relations with Israel, says Erdogan. Turkish president says he will not continue to develop relations with Israel in the future. So there's a severing of relations, this escalation of the conflict in the Middle East, and of course, in the false dispensational understanding of the fulfillment of prophecy among evangelicals, they're looking for an alliance between Russia and Turkey and Syria and other Muslim powers in the Middle East to be in a final conflict, a World War III, as it were, Armageddon, with Israel, in literal Israel in the Middle East, in alliance with America and the Western powers. And we can see from this development with Turkey, which has been in alliance with the Western powers, it's actually part of NATO, it's still part of NATO. And yet we see this severing of relations with Israel, where Turkey seems to be shifting sides and aligning with Russia more, and coming into harmony with Satan's perception that he's trying to push on the world of the fulfillment of false prophecy, because he's controlling the kings of the earth to make it seem like this false prophecy is coming to pass. We also have seen North Korea suddenly return into the news, where North Korea, here we have an article from Newsweek, North Korea warns of U.S. of thermonuclear war. So from Russia, we're getting nuclear threats. From North Korea, we're getting nuclear threats. From Iran, we're getting nuclear threats. There is a dramatic escalation in the past several months in these this psychological conditioning to expect that a nuclear attack could come at any time from seemingly multiple directions. Here again, from November 19th, 2024, North Korea's state media warns U.S.-led nuclear alliance on doorstep. That's also from Newsweek. Newsweek, by the way, is basically a CIA front organization. Here, a very interesting video from Little Light Studios. This is an Adventist ministry. It says, evangelicals rise to power to bring about the end times, how they'll influence Trump's presidency. And it goes through many of the prominent evangelicals that are taking prominent positions in the Trump administration and what that portends in the near future. Here we have from the New York Post from November 25th, top NATO military chair warns business leaders to prepare for wartime scenario. What? The head of the military alliance called NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is telling business leaders to get ready for war, because war's coming. Here from the Daily Star in the UK, World War III fears as nuclear warning from U.S. government highlights areas 15 minutes from disaster. The U.S. FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, has issued a chilling guide on how to survive a nuclear attack as global tensions rise amid the conflict in Ukraine and Middle Eastern disputes grow more heated. Here from November 25th, Russia considers deploying missiles to Asia. Nuclear missiles. I'm not going to get into the details of all these articles. There's just too many. I just want to sweep through the headlines of the past few months and some of the key things that have been happening. Here also from November 25th, from the U.S. Sun, this is the U.S. version of the U.K. publication, Eye on the Enemy. Stratofortress bombers from the U.K. buzz Russia in show of force as NATO chief warns Europe to brace for total war with Putin. Stratofortress bombers can carry both conventional and nuclear weapons. So it's not just threats coming from Russia against America, but there's actually direct threatening, aggressive actions that are being taken by Western powers to make Russia uncomfortable and to make them feel like they're under threat or of attack, including nuclear attack. Here, also from the Sun, Vlad's threat, UK and NATO call emergency meeting after Putin threatens to unleash more unstoppable hypersonic missiles on the West. Which, of course, Putin threatened, because of what's happening in Ukraine, not to attack Ukraine, but to actually attack the Western powers that are arming and supplying and helping Ukraine to fight with Russia. And that was, again, one of the red lines that Putin had given that we've crossed. Again, from the Sun, direct Vlad threat, Putin warns that he could strike British and U.S. targets as he confirms launch of new hypersonic missile in Ukraine. There's the direct headline that Putin is not just threatening Ukraine, Putin is threatening all of the Western powers directly. Now, our next article is from the Express. Notice how a lot of these articles are coming from actually UK publications. And a lot of this rhetoric and psychological conditioning trying to make people expect war to break out and nuclear war to break out is interestingly coming from the UK, which has been under a strong influence and control of the papacy for a very long time at this point. The UK and France are in talks to deploy troops to Ukraine over fears of US removing support. So as Trump is talking about removing US support, now the European powers, including the UK and France, are talking about directly sending troops to Ukraine, which would really mean World War III. Here again from Newsweek in the US, Europe quietly prepares for World War III. I mean, this over and over and over again. This is from December 3rd, 2024. From November 30th, Russia issues warning to U.S. over catastrophic nuclear exchange scenario. Also from Newsweek. Back at the Sun in the UK, the end is near. Syria's president's rule could end in days after rebels enter Damascus, as image of Assad is found. And of course, Syria did fall to ISIS and Al-Qaeda elements who were actually armed and funded by the United States. Interestingly, specifically by the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, the same one that Trump has cut off the funding for, and the same one that actually provided funding for ADRA, the Adventist Development and Relief Organization. That's overthrowing governments. And yet our relief organization is taking money from the same organization that's funding ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. And of course, again, the false dispensationalist view of the fulfillment of end-time prophecy sees an alliance between Russia, Turkey, and Syria especially, along with Iran and other Middle Eastern powers. And here, Syria has now had a shift in its government, just as we're having a change in the policy in Turkey, we saw, and of course, all the developments that we've seen in Russia and Iran. Everything's coming together for this final conflict. Again here, December 7th, 2024, in Fight for Syria, a battle for domination of the entire Middle East. And making this a clash of civilizations in the Middle East, which of course is a deception. End-time prophecy points us to the paper power and to the image of the beast in America as the key locations for the fulfillment of end-time prophecy. But Satan wants all the attention to remain on the literal Middle East and on literal Israel, and a deception so people won't discern the truth. And of course, ultimately, the fire come down from heaven. What we saw in Revelation 13, the purpose is to cement that deception in the minds of the people to where they call for the setting up of the image of the beast. Here
Lost
is
you
an
again,
article.
Brother Craig.
Go ahead.
You're gone, brother.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Please keep letting me know if the sound cuts out. I think it's my internet connection because Satan, of course, is not happy with this study. Here we have an article about Trump plans to scrap policy restricting ICE arrests at churches, schools, and hospitals. Of course, this is from December 11th, 2024, and subsequently, this policy actually has been implemented since the Trump administration came to power on January 20th. And now, Adventists aren't supporters of lawlessness, but here we see a policy that is being implemented that's creating a precedent to where government can come into churches and to schools, including church schools, to take people away who they don't think are supposed to be here. Now, of course, illegal immigrants aren't supposed to be here, and we can have sympathy for them. We can want to have higher legal immigration, but we don't support people breaking the law just to get what they want. And yet, here comes a policy that will be used as precedent in the future for turning this instead of against immigrants, but against those who are Bible believers and who are ultimately will be against the earthly laws in their allegiance to God's law. Here's another article about from December 15th, 2024. How many Americans think the world is edging towards World War III? Now, here's a poll, and it's a very high percentage. Nearly half of Americans think World War III is imminent. So the psychological conditioning is working. December 16th, this is very interesting to me. The whole mystery drones that were flying around, particularly New Jersey and New York, back in December and in January, and that still are having some developments. Here we're told the mystery drones could be trying to find, quote, radioactive material. And that's why the government wasn't saying anything about what they were actually doing, was because these drones were actually searching for loose nukes in America, especially around New York. Isn't that interesting? Now, whether that's true or not, it's creating the psychological mindset that it could be so. Also here's an article from December 18th. New York radiation levels spike amid the drone sightings as Americans told to prepare for the worst. And an expert on U.S.-China relations has warned that hundreds of drones buzzing New Jersey homes and military bases could be the precursor to a grim attack. And that they're actually trying to find nuclear weapons or radiological bombs that are already in America. This is what the articles are saying. This isn't me saying it. I'm just reading the articles. But I'm trying to show how the mindset of people is being manipulated. Here from the Metro, on December 17th, Russia detains man 29 over assassination of top general with e-scooter bomb. This top general that was assassinated in Russia was actually their head of nuclear weapons and nuclear troops. That's pretty interesting, a pretty important person to be assassinated, top general in charge of nuclear troops in Russia. Some might even think of that as an act of war. If the head of the nuclear security and nuclear troops in America was assassinated, that would be a serious issue. And I'm sure the Russians consider it serious as well. Here from the Telegraph in the UK, the weapon that triggered a new nuclear arms race, and Russia is winning. Putin has been steadily expanding his arsenal of tactical nuclear weapons, and now experts are calling for the US and NATO to do the same. So tactical nuclear weapons are supposedly smaller nuclear weapons, like battlefield nuclear weapons, that instead of destroying an entire city would destroy several blocks of a city. Or
Those are hybrid nukes.
yes, and ones that seemingly have a lower threshold for actually using. And the idea that we actually have to increase our tactical nukes is somewhat absurd. Actually, both Russia and the US have many hundreds or even thousands of tactical nukes in storage that just aren't battlefield ready, but that could, in a very short amount of time, be made battlefield ready. But there's this movement to actually develop new, more modern ones that could be used today. Here from the Mirror in the UK from December 18th. Counter-terror chief warns of smoldering UK threat with 3 late-stage attacks foiled. These terror groups are capitalizing on the chaos. So there's terror happening in Europe as well, and they're making connections to Syria and all kinds of interesting things. We're not going to spend all of our time on that. Here from Reuters, from December 19th, Biden travels to Rome in January to meet with Pope Francis. So one of the last things that President Biden did before he left office was to meet with Pope Francis. Very interesting. Just showing the influence of the beast power on the image of the beast as it's being formed. Here from the Telegraph in the UK, what's the date here? This is December 22nd. Weakened Iran could hit back with a nuclear bomb, Trump told by the White House. So the outgoing Biden administration warned President-elect Trump that Tehran may revisit its nuclear doctrine after events in the Middle East leave it, quote, weakened. Here from Barron's, which is connected to the Wall Street Journal, U.S. agency focused on foreign disinformation, quote, shuts down. A leading U.S. government agency that tracks foreign disinformation has terminated its operations, the State Department said. And the Global Engagement Center has been shut down. And now they've tried to shut down U.S. aid, these agencies that are funded by the U.S. government that actually are used to destabilize foreign governments. Now, are we actually stopping doing these things, or are the public-facing agencies that supposedly are involved in this work being supposedly taken away so that it's just done in a different way that isn't as obvious? That's certainly an interesting question. At Trump's inauguration, reports of a pay to pray. According to report, you can pray with Trump and Melania. It'll only cost you $100,000. So here is a very interesting development along the lines of a growing union of church and state, or a blending of the two. Here from December 24th from CNN, how America lost control of the bird flu, setting the stage for another pandemic. So we've actually had multiple articles along this line. I don't know if I've included any others in this list that we're looking tonight, but bird flu has supposedly gone into cattle and into maybe dogs or cats or something, and they're saying at any time it could transfer to humans. And of course, there's been other diseases that have been suggested are about to break forth in another pandemic. And the whole scenario of what we saw with COVID, they're making psychological conditioning to prepare the way to re-implement similar policies that we experienced during COVID. Here from The Guardian in the UK tells us, Bilderberg Group changes itself for the modern world and return of Trump. Once the apex of, quote, conspiracy theories, the influential group signals a shift by naming ex-NATO chief as its new co-chair. So interesting, the Bilderberg Group, a secret society. Of course, Sister White tells us that in order to understand the working out of the mystery of iniquity, we have to study the secret societies. And here, the secret societies, which are the behind the scenes soldiers doing the work of the papal power, they're making dramatic shifts and changes in the expectation of this new Trump administration. This is just an interesting article that caught my eye from Christmas, December 25th. Brazil's iconic Christ the Redeemer statue is caught in a battle between church and state. So church and state issues are being agitated the world over, including in South America and Brazil. Here from ABC News, December 28th, churches fight to stay open as attendance dwindles. Houses of worship around the country are adopting various strategies to survive. So there was a spike in church attendance after the lockdowns ended after COVID, but that has dwindled. And of course, even that spike in attendance after the lockdowns ended, it still was dramatically reduced from what attendance was before COVID. So churches are becoming less and less frequented in America and in the West, and which is very interesting because that was also something that happened. There was a great spiritual declension right before the Great Disappointment in 1844. That was noted repeatedly across the religious press at that time. And here we have the same development. Of course, we know there's just about to be this great spiritual revival that's coming. In fact, that's one of the things that we could associate with the idea of fire coming down from heaven. Fire coming down from heaven in the story of Elijah we saw was connected with a true spiritual revival, but also in Revelation 13, fire come down from heaven is connected with a counterfeit spiritual revival, the one that we're expecting to come in America. And we can see from the developments of the new Trump administration how this is coming to pass. Here's an interesting issue from, well, maybe we can put this at the end, but from Fulcrum 7, which is an Adventist website, considered fringe by mainstream Adventism, but often points out things that other Adventists don't really want to say. And here they get into the issue is way bigger than Ron Kelly and Conrad Vine. And the escalating shaking within Adventism with the banning of Conrad Vine and the firing of Ron Kelly. And we're going to see even more developments have happened recently where it's clear that the shaking is in full force in the church, as we see the shaking happening in the world as well at the same time. Here's an article from New Year's Day, January 1st. Update, Shamsuddin Jabbar identified as New Orleans terrorist. ISIS flag found with explosives in pickup truck. So he carried around his ISIS flag with him as he goes on his terrorist attack, just so we'll know he's ISIS, because it's what the message that we're going, and of course, this was what we're expecting. Terrorist attacks happening in America being attributed to Muslims. The very thing that we expected happened New Year's Day in New Orleans. Here's another article from the New York Post. New Orleans ISIS terrorist Shamsuddin Jabbar had bomb-making station in Quran open to chilling passage in his home. Here from the Sun, high alert, man driving erratically on sidewalk near U.S. Capitol is captured a day after NOLA terror attack. So on January 2nd, a man attempted a terrorist attack in downtown D.C. near the U.S. Capitol. Again, that was ultimately attributed to a Muslim. Here, another article from AP News. On January 2nd, FBI says driver of New Orleans rampage acted alone and was 100% inspired by Islamic State group. Interesting how they can find these things out so quickly. Perhaps that's what they wanted them to find out. Makes one wonder. Here's an article from MSN News, really originally from Axios World. Scoop, Biden discussed plans to strike Iran's nuclear sites if Tehran speeds towards bomb. So they're putting out articles saying Tehran is moving towards a bomb, And now they're saying if they find any more confirmation, they feel justified to actually directly, kinetically strike Iran's nuclear sites. Here from Politico on January 3rd tells us the incredible world-altering black swan events that could upend life in 2025. And they go on to give quite a list of possible major disruptions. Solar phenomena, interesting how that could be connected with fire come down from heaven, infectious disease outbreaks, white supremacist groups, the conflict in the Middle East, the conflict with Russia. There's the development of nuclear weapons. I'm not going to go into all of it, but there's articles being put out there that we should expect world-altering events to happen in 2025. Of course, going back even to a few years ago, but since COVID, we all might remember how Walter Veith had on his What's Up Prof series, had an episode where they focused on the intelligence agent, not an agency, but kind of a contractor, intelligence contractor who Deagle.com that had these predictions that there would be these dramatic drops in population in Western countries in 2025. Of course, here we've arrived in 2025, and we're expecting this fire come down from heaven and a third part of men killed, whatever exactly that means, whether spiritual or literal. And now, even just mainstream publications are putting out speculation along the same lines. Here from the Telegraph in the UK, we're in the endgame, why Kiev's blow to Russian gas threatens to divide Europe. That's from January 3rd, 2025. Again, the conflict with Russia and Ukraine is affecting the whole continent of Europe and heading towards war. Here from the Daily Mail in the UK, Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau resigns. That's January 6, 2025. Of course, he didn't actually resign. He announced his intention to resign. Interesting. Months later, which of course means anytime between now and then he could just change his mind. But he has seemingly lost political support, which is why he was pressured to make that move. And there seems to be this dramatic shift. It's happened in America, from the King of the South to the King of the North, and of course, north of America now in Canada, the same dramatic change has come to pass. And of course, we recently also had a shift in administration in Mexico. Nearly all North America is having a huge political shift right now in this time frame of the Fifth Trumpet. Here again from January 6th from the Jerusalem Post, Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear program in 2025 could transform the Middle East. Just over and over and over again, these articles are coming out on these issues. Again from the Sun in the UK, Red Menace fears of Chinese sabotage as deep sea cable is cut off the coast of Taiwan, days after Russian ship dragged anchor. That's from January 5th, 2025. Again, these broken cables are often viewed as a pretext to war, to cut off communication with the rest of the world. Here from the Irish Star through MSN, World War III fears as Anthony Blinken makes chilling Russia-North Korea equipment warning. Anthony Blinken was the outgoing neocon head of the State Department in the Biden administration. We won't get into all the details, but this alliance between Russia and North Korea and the technology that's being shared, and also the nuclear threats, of course. Here's an article from CBS. I'm not turning off my ad blocker, but there was a Tesla Cybertruck explosion outside the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas that was investigated as a possible terror attack. Here from January 1st, again, the U.S. Capitol struck by lightning on New Year's Eve, seen as God's message by MAGA. And of course, we can actually see the lightning striking both the Capitol and actually the One
Vatican.
World Tower in Manhattan, in New York.
And also the Vatican too, brother.
And also the Vatican. That's right, brother. So these things, and of course, we know demons can and angels can cause lightning strikes at will, essentially, with God's permission. Uh, Here also from CBS, FBI has seized the largest explosive cache in history at a Virginia farm, credited with potential domestic terrorism. That was in January. Here's from the Advent Messenger publication, also an Adventist publication on the so-called fringes, but that has interesting articles about what's happening in the church. And it says, with representatives from various churches, Pope Francis launches the 2025 Jubilee, a project aimed at renewing the Catholic faith. So, of course, we have this whole Jubilee of the Pope here in 2025, and how it's coinciding with these fifth and sixth trumpets, particularly with the sixth trumpet. And of course, we see the papal counterfeit of the end time message connected with the Jubilee that we've been studying, the true message of the 50th year in the outpouring of the Spirit in the latter rain, and the proclamation of liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants of, the true message of liberty of conscience. That has become such a lightning rod in the church and will soon be in the world. And here the counterfeit message is going forth, and there's a movement for a false revival among Catholics and evangelicals, as Satan anticipates the coming true revival with the fire come down from heaven. I found that interesting. Here, sadly, we have this Jubilee 2025 from the papacy, and Adventists can't be outdone, so we have our own Pentecost 2025 initiative that's been pushed widely throughout the church, the General Conference, the North American Division, and the whole idea that we can tell God when to pour out his Spirit, which is essentially what this movement is about, is surely not in harmony with the mindset of heaven at this time, and is far more in harmony with the papal 2025 Jubilee movement. I found this one interesting from the Catholic News Agency. Cardinal Timothy Dolan will lead the prayer at Donald Trump's inauguration. That's from January 6, 2025. Cardinal Dolan, as the Cardinal of New York, the Archbishop of New York, is also the head of the Knights of Malta in America, and he's also the spiritual head of the U.S. military as the head of the Knights of Malta. And he was the one who prayed the key prayer at Trump's inauguration. There was also two young women who have a YouTube channel called Girls Gone Bible, who are prominent evangelicals who speak in tongues, but seem to be sincere, perhaps are sincerely deceived, and are very attractive and have got a very prominent following among young people, and they also were permitted to pray a prayer at Trump's inauguration, seeing this movement for a union between the Catholics and the evangelicals becoming very prominent on Inauguration Day and connected with politics. Here, Cardinal McElroy says he prays for Trump's success as he takes over the Washington Archdiocese. This is from Crux, which is Crux Now, the Taking the Catholic Pulse from January 7th. So here we have the new Archbishop of Washington, D.C., who is praying for Trump's success for this revival of Make America Pray Again. Here also from Advent Messenger, January 3rd, 2025, Israel embraces Monday to Friday trading week with Sundays off in order to align with international markets. So even the so-called nation of Israel, the literal nation of Israel, the home of the Jews in the Middle East, has decided to officially, or more officially, honor Sunday, supposedly to come into more in harmony with the rest of the world. Banks have been closed for a long time in Israel on Sundays already. But now here is an additional no financial trading whatsoever in Israel on Sundays, just in time for these end time events. Then, of course, we had these whole wildfires in Los Angeles that happened in January, and the terrible scenes that we had connected with that, and these rising natural disasters that are happening. Here from CBS News, Iran puts on show of force with war games ahead of Trump's second term. As we have new weapons and equipment, and very interesting ideas in here. I wish I could spend more time on it, but the rhetoric is escalating. Here from The Sun from January 15th, sky attack. Putin plotting terror attacks against airlines in global wave of sabotage, warns Polish Prime Minister Tusk. How many plane crashes have we had in the past month after having almost none over the past several years? And here was an article in mid-January that said that there would be coming sabotage against airlines, and it would be attributed to Putin doing terror attacks against the West. Very interesting. I just threw this one in from January 19th, Planetary Alignment 2025. This is what it really means when 7 planets line up in the sky, which is going to actually happen at the end of February. So there's actually an interesting number 7. 7 of the inner planets will be aligning in, or the 7 main planets in our solar system will be coming into a very rare alignment at this very time. Again, God made the sun and the moon and the stars for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And from our perspective, the planets in our solar system look like stars. Here's an alignment of 7 stars. Very interesting. Here from the Wall Street Journal, January 17th, so right before Trump came in a new age of empire, great powers aim to carve up the planet. After World War II, nations pledged to create a more equal and law-abiding world. Now, Russia, China, and the U.S. are returning to an older model in which powerful countries impose their will. Interesting. Here from The Independent in the UK, my biggest fear as Trump takes office, moral apathy. As America faces unprecedented political and environmental challenges, the nation's moral compass seems to be faltering. Chris Wright explores the implications of this moral decline in the age of Trump. Well, we know there's going to be a, quote, great moral revival in the age of Trump as a response to the moral apathy and decline. But it's being engineered. Here from the Washington Post through MSN, 2 Iranian Supreme Court judges shot dead in a rare Tehran attack. So, I mean, imagine if 2 U.S. Supreme Court justices were shot dead. That would be a major terrorist attack and really an act of war. And here it happened in Iran just a month ago. Here from The Sun, bloody tide. ISIS fanatics plotting to unleash wave of terror from camps like Shamim Begum's, says general who defeated the death cult, from January 12th, 2025. Again, escalating the rhetoric about a clash of civilizations between Christianity, so-called Christianity, and Islam. And of course, we've recently got the proof that the US government, through US aid, is actually funding ISIS, supposedly to accomplish its purposes behind the scenes. I found this interesting. We had a minor earthquake in New England on January 27th. 3.8 magnitude earthquake strikes off the coast of New England. The east coast of the United States is literally shaking during this time. And the earthquake shakes Boston area. Did you feel it? While not destructive and fairly common areas with more seismic activity like California, that's relatively large for New England. Here from Reuters through MSN, scientists use genetic engineering to create mice with two male parents. So they're continuing to defile God's creation and to amalgamate man and beast, as inspiration tells us, was the sin above all others by which God had to destroy the world by a flood. And now they're doing the same things today, showing clearly that the time for the fire to be the means of cleansing has come. Here from CNBC, Google reclassifies U.S. as sensitive country alongside China, Russia, and Trump's Gulf of America comments, after Trump's Gulf of America comments. That's from January 28th. So now the world is looking at America in the same light as China and Russia. Here from the Metro in the UK, January 28th, doomsday clock moves 1 second closer to midnight in latest Armageddon prediction. Here from NBC News, this is also from January 28th. White House says most New Jersey drones were authorized by the FAA. This was not the enemy. These were authorized drones. They won't tell us what they were authorized for because, again, they were likely searching for radiation. Or at least that's what's out there in the media. Here from the Express. Again, Express is also, this is the US version, but it's really also a UK publication. Habitable planet circling the sun discovered by scientists in huge breakthrough. So they claim to have found a habitable planet circling a sun-like star, not several light years away, but not too far away in galactic terms. And of course, is part of the psychological conditioning connected with the idea of aliens landing or appearing, so-called Project Bluebeam. And which we know, if such a thing ever came to pass, would be part of Satan's end time deceptions. Yes, there's been extraterrestrials with us for 6,000 years, actually. They're demons. And there's actually holy angels here as well. And they're all from another planet. They're from another place. They're not from here. And yet they're here. But when these beings appear, it's going to be a deception. And the psychological conditioning needed to prepare people to accept the appearance of Satan as an angel of light is continuing to escalate in the news. Here from Mediaite on January 29th, priest throws Nazi-like salute at pro-life rally in D.C. in trollish nod to Elon Musk controversy. There's the priest doing his Sig Heil. Things are really getting strange in this world. January 31st, 2025, fighter jets scrambled from Alaska and Canada as Russian warplanes spotted in the Arctic, NORAD says. Russia continues to increase its testing activities at the borders of America and Canada and North America to probe for weaknesses and to test our defenses. January 31st, from the Daily Mail, NASA says chance of city-destroying asteroid hitting the Earth have increased. And they've actually supposedly now found a city-destroying asteroid that potentially could impact Earth within a few years, they now say. Very interesting. Wonder what they're trying to deceive people there. Who's the rock that's coming to hit the earth soon, as it were? The rock Christ Jesus. Here also from the Daily Mail, hedge fund, this is interesting, from February 1st, so this is about 3 weeks ago, hedge funds' massive bet on stock market crash raises alarms for 401ks and risks the ire of Trump. So there's powerful moneyed interests that are expecting a stock market crash very soon. Wonder why they're expecting that. I'm also expecting that, but probably not for the same reasons. Here from the Telegraph, hedge funds bet billions on market crash in Trump's America. Goldman Sachs reports a surge in short bets against U.S. stocks. Somebody on the inside knows something with these multi-billion-dollar bets on an imminent stock market crash. You cannot have short positions for long times. You have to keep renewing them. So if someone's making a short bet against stocks, that means they think it's something that's going to happen very soon. Here from Reuters as well, the crashed U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter that was going up the Potomac and crashed, it was responsible for doomsday readiness. Did you know that? The Black Hawk helicopter that collided with a passenger jet in Washington on Wednesday was a training flight along a route core to the seldom discussed military mission to evacuate senior officials to safety in the event of an attack on the U.S., and specifically an attack on the main government institutions in D.C. The military mission, known as continuity of government or continuity of operations, is meant to preserve the ability of the U.S. government to operate. So they're escalating their testing and planning for a catastrophic attack on the capital of the United States. And they're so desperate in that effort that they actually got to the point where they did this mission where they actually crashed into another plane with this helicopter that was supposedly taking members of Congress to a secure location outside the city because of an attack, or it was simulating that, or planning for that event. What do they know that most people don't? That they're doing these things. Here from the Telegraph, also from January 31st, Iran secretly building nuclear missiles that can hit Europe. Revolutionary Guard aerospace experts working on a warhead with a 3,000-kilometer range at 2 sites disguised as satellite launch bases. And here they've got the circle of where it can supposedly now attack. So they're putting out the idea now that Iran is secretly building missiles that can deliver nuclear warheads to hit Europe. I just put this in here because I found it very interesting. I happened to come across this during recently, that this is from the Nashville Public Library in Nashville, Tennessee. Here's a bronze statue whose title is The Recording Angel by Audrey Flack in the plaza of this Symphony Center in Nashville. And of course, there's a picture of it. It's quite a beautiful statue, but a little risque for being an angel. But it's called the Recording Angel. I've never heard that term ever used except in Sister White's writing, the Recording Angel. And I also find it very interesting when you see the building where this Recording Angel is located. It's a building with multiple pillars. And of course, Sister White had a vision of balls of fire falling on Nashville and hitting a building with prominent pillars. And it just so happens that right there where this coming judgment of God is coming, they've got a recording angel full time, waiting.
Facing life's record.
Isn't that interesting? And this person who did it, they're almost kind of like an occultist. So I don't really think, this is necessarily from God, but it's still very interesting how this imagery is being put there and the symbolism that it represents. And it's interestingly, it's been there. It was dedicated in 2015, the same time that we believe the judgment of the living process began. Actually, literally a month before it began, in September 2015 with the Pope's visit. Here from CNBC, Putin says Europe will stand at the feet of the master as Trump's tariffs alarm allies. So there's this rhetoric going back and forth of power men taking over in the world, strong men. Here from the Daily Mail, incredible images capture U.S. Navy testing a new laser weapon that never runs out of power. Here's a picture of it. So they've apparently developed this new laser weapon that can, when it's on a nuclear-powered destroyer, can essentially fire continuously, nonstop. If such a weapon was deployed on a nuclear-powered satellite, could that be described as fire come down from heaven? I sure think it could. And this is not something that is speculation or future science. This is something that has actually been tested and deployed and is in working operation now. Just in time. This article was from February 3rd, 2025, when they at least let us know this weapon is now operational. Here from the Wall Street Journal, Trump kicks aside Congress with sweeping claims of presidential power. With aggressive reading of the Constitution, President aims to upend the balance of power in Washington. That's from February 2nd, 2025. There's this great movement to set aside constitutional principles and to have a strong man in charge in America who can make America great again, make America pray again, as it were. Here from the Hill, which is, speaking of Capitol Hill, Musk calls USAID a criminal organization that should die, from 2/2/2025. Mike Benz, I think I talked about this in my last update. He worked at the State Department in Trump's first administration. He since has become the head of the Foundation for Freedom Online and has been exposing all of the censorship that has been happening by the U.S. government against U.S. citizens, using these powers that were created to do these things against foreign powers, but that now all that knowledge and technology is being turned back inward against America and turning them into a criminal organization. And there's this great war sort of going on behind the scenes about taking control of the government here and who's in control. And the so-called deep state. And of course, there's all kinds of deceptions going on connected with that as well, because it's really, even though in some ways this is actually dealing and hopefully undoing some actual real corruption, at the same time, it's consolidating power so that a different movement can go forward, which we're expecting to happen, a spiritual movement, where these things turn to the final prophetic movements that we've been expecting. Here from Yahoo News, Trump says he's given advisors instructions for Iran to be, quote, obliterated if it assassinates him. We don't need to speculate long about how we would actually fulfill that order to obliterate Iran if that came to pass. February 4th, 2025 is that article. Here from Yahoo Finance, Trump directs officials to ramp up economic pressure on Iran. So even though Trump says he's not for war. He's also using all kinds of soft power to engage with these powers around the world, tariffs and other economic power, which other powers often view as acts of war. For instance, when Japan's access to oil was cut off near the beginning of World War I, that was one of the reasons that they used to attack Pearl Harbor. And it was also to gain access to components needed to create synthetic oil that Hitler attacked, I believe it was Austria, and during World War II as well. So economic issues can lead to war as well, and often do. Just like on an individual level, often economic issues are at the heart of wars and divorce within families. Same within between nations. Here from the Express on February 7th, Iran's supreme leaders chilling forward reply after Donald Trump floats nuclear talks. And he said there should be no negotiations with such a government. And they're putting out the belief or understanding that the leaders in Iran are not willing to negotiate or talk, which of course could be used as justification for things becoming kinetic or physical. Now, whether that's the case or not, I don't know. I think a lot of what they report in the news about these things is more propaganda than reality, but this is what's being put out in the media. I think there are probably at least some reasonable people in Iran who want to talk, though I'm sure there are crazy people as well who are in charge who don't, who are going along with these occultic powers that are marshaling the nations for the final conflict. Here from the Express in the US, Israel could be forced into major strike on Iran's nuke bases as World War III fears soar. This is actually, well, that's back in October, but thought that was more recent. But still, the same rhetoric going all the way back then of a war, a nuclear war with Iran. These pictures of the looting and the fires in the streets of Philadelphia after the Super Bowl, I put that in there only because Philadelphia was one of the potential cities that was originally one of the capitals of America. And the first capital of America being New York, and then later Philadelphia, and then ultimately in D.C. Here in the Telegraph from February 8th, 2025, revoke fatwa against nuclear weapons. Iranian commanders tell the Ayatollah. Iran must have atomic bombs to survive, Supreme Leader told an extraordinary intervention by regime's military leaders. So now the military leaders are supposedly pressuring the spiritual leader, the Ayatollah, to definitively revoke his fatwa, his so-called holy law, against developing nuclear weapons. That's literally a few days ago that this was put out in the news, less than 2 weeks ago. Daily Mail. Expert, how I know Trump is about to open the floodgates when it comes to UFOs. This is from February 9th. Again, the whole Project Bluebeam and deception about aliens is being pushed heavily. And the supposed whistleblower from last year, David Grush, who was involved in the discovery, the military department that supposedly deals with UFOs, or I think they call them UAVs now. But he has also officially testified before Congress recently, saying that craft and biologics have been found. So this psychological deception is being made very prominent from the highest levels of the U.S. government now. Here from the Washington Post through MSM. By the way, we're close to wrapping up here. Islamic State has regrouped in Somalia and has global ambitions. So again, this whole clash with Islam continuing. That's from even more recently. I don't see the date for me. Here from the Hill, global war fears rising among security experts. So security experts and advisors all over the world now are increasingly warning that global war is imminent. From the Wall Street Journal, here from February 12th, just a week ago, Israel sees opening for strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, U.S. intelligence finds. So supposedly Israel is preparing and sees a political opening and timing to imminently strike Iran's nuclear sites. I wonder how Iran might respond. Here from the Sun, dire Vlad threat. Bombshell spy intel reveals Putin is arming for large-scale war that will trigger World War III, and it's not long until he can strike. So prepare. Supposedly, here's this new spy intel report from our intel agencies from just a week ago that claims that Putin is making secret, behind-the-scenes preparations for a full-on World War III. Anybody who was any country that was actually doing that would have developments that could be seen and viewed because they'd have to be at scale. So for such an intel report to go forth, they'd have to have some evidence to support that. Here from February 13th, Britain warned it must be ready to go to war with Russia. So now they're publicly telling the population of UK to prepare for war with Russia. It's coming. Here from the Wall Street Journal, also February 13th, why dealers are flying gold bars by plane from London to New York. So now they're literally thinking that they need literal gold, and they're bringing it from around the world, specifically from the financial center in London to New York. Wonder why that is. They supposedly say it's because of tariffs, but also these calamities could also trigger an incredible demand for gold bars. Here from Bloomberg through Yahoo Finance, record stock fragility sends warning to the broader market. This is a sign of an imminent crash, according to analysts. Here's another tech site. Tells us Russian drone damages radiation shield at Chernobyl, Ukraine says. So now there's supposedly a potential for radiation leaks at the Chernobyl site in Ukraine as a consequence of the war. Ukraine is blaming Russia. Who knows what the truth is? Here from February 14th, so just last week, Pope Francis to miss Sunday prayers while recovery continues in the hospital. So the Pope has taken ill and has had to cancel several important events. And this is an interesting article from the Wall Street Journal, of all places, February 14th, so just from last Friday. And Brazilians keep breaking up. They're turning to sorcerers and chicken feet for help. Some bemoan spells that work too well as partners become stage 5 clingers. My life became hell on earth. So people turning to mysticism and pagan worship, all of which will ultimately be used to swing the pendulum back to so-called Christianity. Interesting. Here's an article from Bloomberg. Saudi prince steps in as power broker in Trump's New World Order, getting to this focus on the Middle East also. Here from the Daily Mail, massive fears of a massive crash on Wall Street after America's top 50 companies see record levels of fragility. That's from February 15th. So that's just from Sabbath, 3 days ago. Here from CNN, at least one dead as storm batters eastern U.S. with life threatening flooding and prompts evacuations in Kentucky and Virginia. I mean, just to get into all of the natural disasters that have just are almost daily in the news would be too much. And I just put this one article in to point out how much they are being promoted and how much a reality these things really are. This increase in natural disasters, which is prophetic. Here from the Wall Street Journal, a new spy unit is leading Russia's shadow war against the US. The operations of Moscow's Department of Special Tasks have included attempted killing, sabotage, and a plot to put incendiary devices on planes. So these are precursors to World War. Daily Mail again from February 15th. And here is a story about comedian Bill Burr, I've never even heard of, but he has this savage attack on billionaires. He's using language that we won't use, but the idea is that they have to be put down like rabid dogs. There's a whole mindset that all these billionaires that have been prospering through our suffering and who are seemingly manipulating the powers that be, that there's going to be this great populist movement to rise up against them and put them down, like the French Revolution. Do we have inspiration that tells us that a time is coming when the French Revolution is going to go global in this final crisis? Well, this is exactly the kind of rhetoric that was connected with it. And now it's suddenly in the news. Just a couple of days ago, 3 days ago. Here from the Independent in the UK, we have Trump suggests he's above the law with ominous Napoleon quote. Again, these challenges to the balance of power in the government. Here again from Mediaite, Trump administration mistakenly fired staff overseeing the nation's nuclear weapons. This is just from February 14th on Friday, and how the administration is supposedly scrambling to rehire these supposedly laid off workers who are in charge of the nuclear weapons and who have been shut out of their facilities. Who's in charge of these weapons? Do they have a proper accounting of these weapons? What is going on? There's chaos around the nuclear weapons in America, just as the time comes for the fire to come down from heaven. Here from the Daily Beast, Pope warned confidants he may not survive health scare. There's now stories coming along that it's possible that we could have a new pope or no longer have the current pope by the end of the week. And that he's deteriorating rapidly, though, quote, in good spirits. Very interesting. He's 88 years old. That would be a significant prophetic development. Here from the Express in the UK, Trump has given Putin carte blanche to attack London, Paris, or Brussels. A Kremlin insider has claimed that Donald Trump has offered unprecedented concessions to Russia and will allow Vladimir Putin to strike Brussels, Paris, or even London. I mean, what kind of propaganda is this? Here's that video you sent me about Betelgeuse supposedly being ready to go supernova at any moment. That they even have a live stream going continually about it. And of course, as we talked about, Betelgeuse is in the Orion constellation, from whence cometh Christ. And again, the stars are for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. Again, the whole idea that stars are exploding all over the universe all the time, I don't think is a correct, personally, I don't think is a correct explanation of what's actually happening from a biblical worldview. But we certainly do have the idea of a great increase in luminosity of certain stars at certain times. And there's an expectation of this one, Betelgeuse, that's connected with the constellation of Orion, which actually, very interestingly, in the popular mindset of the people, has been connected with spiritualism by Satan. There's a whole, I think at least 2 movies entitled Betelgeuse about this demonic spirit that would appear. So that's very interesting. And now a few more last headlines connected with what's been happening in the church. So that's mostly been what's been happening in the world in these past few months, but there's also been great developments in the church. Not only was Conrad Vine canceled and Ron Kelly fired, but now they've canceled Barbara O'Neill. And that's become a huge development in Adventism in the past couple of weeks or a week or two. Actually, even though actually supposedly the ban goes as far back as 2021 and connected to the timing of the vaccine statements. Very interesting. And it's not much I can really say about that other than, to me, any Adventist who thinks it's okay to ban Barbara O'Neill is really one of the blind leading the blind. That's the simplest way I can put it. I mean, good
That
grief.
makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
I mean, here is just an incredible blessing and gift to our church that God has given us in these last days. And that we could actually take that senior leadership in the health department in our church could take such a position is mind-boggling to me and to many people. Now I have several articles here from Fulcrum 7 and Adventist Messenger to wrap things up, to see some of the spiritual developments here from February 14th, so just 4 days ago. Andrews University is joining the United Nations Climate Change Program. The same United Nations Climate Change Program that we saw was unanimously approved by the United Nations on September 25th, 2015, when the Pope visited and demanded that they adopt it. And they did so unanimously. All the nations of the world adopted. And then, of course, the Pope had his encyclical Laudato Si at the same time, which includes connecting Sunday sacredness and Sunday rest to saving the climate and the planet. And now Andrews University is all on board. The satanic UN agenda, the papal agenda. Right out there, we see a huge, huge split in Adventism. Because people are taking sides, and the sides are polar opposites in philosophy and perspective and principle. And it's difficult to see how they can be reconciled except by the grace of God and the blood of Jesus Christ. Here from February 12th, 2025, Michigan Conference doubles down. The vote to fire Ron Kelly is 13-2. So there's not going to be any repentance by the Michigan Conference or the General Conference about these things. They've hardened their hearts. They're convinced they're right. And they're standing by these decisions that I do not believe are in harmony with the mind or spirit of God. Here from Advent Messenger, Greg Laurie, a prominent evangelical pastor, calls for the U.S. to make America godly again in our nation, state, church, and personal lives. That's actually from today, February 18th, 2025. Very interesting article for anybody who's interested. Here from Advent Messenger, Muslims ask Pope Francis to strengthen the ties between their two religions, February 14th, 2025. Here, this seemingly coming together of false Christianity and Muslims at the same time that they have this conflict of civilizations being pressed in the media. Thank you for muting. Here from Advent Messenger, February 15th, 2025, is a Sunday law update with Dr. Olatunji from State Line SDA. And very interesting on the developments happening in the Trump administration, moving towards this transition time. Also here from February 12th, 2025, a leading Catholic publication claims that the Pope's call for a Sabbath rest in Laudato Si is the best way to combat the dangers of AI technology. So now Sunday rest is the solution to AI technology, according to the Pope. Unbelievable. They can get everything on the side of AI technology, Sunday rest. Here from February 7th, 2025, an American media company promotes Sunday reset as the ultimate day to reconnect, rest, and recharge. So the idea of a Sunday reset is now being prominently pushed in the media in America, unabashedly. February 6, 2025, Donald Trump tells members of Congress that God's plan for America will happen sooner rather than later. That's quite a statement. What God is he talking about? The God of heaven or the God of this earth? Because, quote, God's plan for America will happen sooner rather than later. And he's going to play his part. And it was actually, he was participated in 2 prayer breakfasts, and he also he started the officially made this White House faith office with Paula White at the head to promote the quote the defense of Christianity in America. Has now become an official White House office. February 6, 2025, Trump has ordered the U.S. Attorney General to create a task force to unite our country again as one nation under God. A direct order from the President to the U.S. Attorney General to create a task force to unite our country as one nation under God. Can't make this stuff up. January 31st, 2025, Pope Francis' Jubilee 2025 is centered around Sabbath rest, much like the evangelicals' Project 2025. So you have a spiritual movement, Jubilee 2025, at the same time melding perfectly with the political movement or civil movement, Project 2025. Because there's this harmony, the growing union of church and state forming right before our eyes. January 30th, 2025, Catholic headline: among Protestants and Orthodox, the authority of the Pope has eventually prevailed. The wound is being healed, the daughters are coming back to the mother, and they're openly, publicly bragging about it within the past month. January 27th, 2025, the Pope tells an interfaith delegation that the only way to make the world better is through fraternity. We have to all come together in an unholy union. That's the only way. Advent Messenger here as well, January 23rd, 2025. A Catholic archbishop preached at an Adventist church, which he called a common house, and declared that God's love binds us all into one brotherhood. So now they're literally allowing Catholic archbishops to stand and preach in the pulpit at Adventist churches. But Conrad Vine can't stand in the pulpit and preach at an Adventist church. And Ron Kelly can't stand in the pulpit and preach at an Adventist church. And Barbara O'Neill can't stand and preach in an Adventist church. But a Catholic archbishop, no problem. I mean, it's just literally unbelievable. All right. I think that is enough for tonight.
Praise the Lord, not.
So we can see that the idea that, quote, nothing's happened is clearly not true. That
Excuse me, brothers and sisters, while I break into glossolalia. Oh, so la 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 do.
What on earth is that, sister? You speaking in tongues?
Glossolalia. Yes, I'm speaking in tongues. I feel the Holy Spirit coming down.
Lord have mercy.
Sorry.
Sister. I know you're
That was
not
really
being
bad.
serious, but I'd appreciate you not doing that during a Bible study. But I know.
Okay, I apologize.
Yes. We see these things
Please
are
forgive me.
truly coming together, that developments are happening rapidly. And literally, this was just a few smatterings of things that I wanted to highlight. There was so much more. I couldn't possibly get to it all, especially the unbelievably rapid developments that have been happening in the Trump administration and the massive increase in executive orders that set aside the checks and balances of our country to focus, to center all power in one man. And many of the things that he's doing actually are seemingly good, declaring that there's only male and female. And on we could go down with things that we actually might agree with what he's doing, but we can't agree with the methods. The fact that these policies were put in place through executive orders doesn't make it really great to undo them through new executive orders. The old one should be rescinded, but the government shouldn't be operating based on dictation. We don't have dictators in America. We have a system of checks and balances in a constitutional republic, or at least we used to. But we see that very system is breaking down as it was prophesied to happen, that there would be a repudiation of every principle of our Protestant and Republican government. In the sense not of the Republican Party, but as in a republic. So everything is in place for this time of transition to the sixth trumpet and the time when the fire and the smoke and the brimstone are to manifest. The fire come down from heaven that will trigger the call for the setting up of the image of the beast fully. Since we've gone quite long, why don't we close with prayer? Heavenly Father, our most holy creator God, we thank you so much for revealing these things, Lord. We thank you for this technology that we can have access to this information in a way that was not possible in times past in the same way it is now. That things are happening so rapidly that these electronic means of communication have made it possible for us to keep track of and to watch and pray about these things. Please help us to have understanding of the times, that we might know what to do. Protect us from every error and every deception and all fanaticism. Please change our hearts and fill us with your love and reveal your glory, that you might draw others to you, that we might be where you are always, never to be separated again, is our prayer. May it be in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.